Alright, so if you wanted to start learning Blender, but you're not sure what all these modifiers are for, then this is a video where I'm going to tell you what every single modifier does. I'm going to explain a little bit about it and where you might use it, and hopefully that will give you the incentive to go learn Blender a bit more. Alright, so the first modifier, we're going to go through the Generate first. The first modifier on here is called Array. What that does is, if we move this over on the x-axis, you've got this like X on the floor, the green is your Y-axis. If you ever forget, then there's this gizmo in the top right, that kind of tells you which axis is which. And we've got the X-axis here. There's a blue one as well, which is the Z-axis, but that isn't showing up, whereas if I lock it to the Z, you'll be able to see it. So to do that, it's just G to grab it, and then if you press Z, X or Y, it will lock it to that specific axis. But for the array modifier, if I apply this, all that does is that duplicates it over. We can adjust the offset of it, so you could have it duplicated like this, and then I can move the original one over and add another modifier, but this time I can set it to duplicate on the Y instead, so I can set 0 and -2. And that'll duplicate over there. The next modifier is called Bevel. What this does is it's gonna, if we grab the edges of this, so if you press tab and go into edit mode, you've got 3 selections: vertexes, which are the points, then you've got edges, which are the lines in between each point, and then you've got faces. Four edges, or three edges will make a try, 4 will make a quad. Anything above that is an n-gon. You typically want to avoid those in game design. But we want the edges. What this is going to do is apply a bevel to the entire thing. So if we were to bevel this edge, it creates this sort of flat side. We could adjust this, so how many segments we want, make it a bit more smooth. If we apply the modifier, then it's going to bevel the whole thing. So the next modifier on the list is called Boolean. What this does is there's 3 modes: intersect, union and difference, and you'll use this if you've got geometry inside each other. So I've set up three different examples here so we can see all 3. On this box I've got intersect, so what this will do, if I toggle that on, then as you'll see, if I remember which one it is, that one, where the sphere was colliding with it, that's the only parts that remain of the box. Not too sure what particular uses you'll have with that, but it exists. The second example is union, which if I toggle that back on, it kind of spawns the second one in. So if I turn off that sphere, you can see that they are one piece. If we go to the last one, which is difference, if I turn that one on, then remove that sphere, you can see it kind of cuts it out. So you can use this to cut out shapes from an existing, if you've got some geometry that you want to cut a hole out of, or you want to create some sort of shape, but not like digging too far into it, or you don't want to quite create a hole, then you can go with difference, which will cut some sort of shape to create an indent or something like that. Okay, so our next modifier is called Build. For this I don't have enough geometry in this cube, so I'm going to have to select everything. You can just press A and then right click, subdivide. I'm just going to add a few edges to this. We'll go 6. It doesn't particularly matter too much, there's just not enough geometry for me to accurately really show this. So from here I can add a build modifier. The start frame is what frame your build's going to start on, so ours is starting on 1 and it's going to go for 100 seconds, or 100 frames even. So if you scrub through the animation, it won't actually show anything because we're in edit mode. But if we come through into object mode now, you can see our cube's disappeared, and if I play it, it'll start filling it in. So that'll go for 100 frames. However, if we tick randomize, then it kind of looks a bit more like it's building in, a bit more visually pleasing in my opinion. Okay, so for the next modifier, it's called Decimate. I brought the monkey in for this one, just to have more edge loops and topology to show it off a bit more. But what this will do is Decimate will basically bring the topology down. It will do what it can to keep the exact same shape, but reduce the amount of faces. So as you can see, it says 12,500 face count in object mode, and it looks fairly normal. However, as we start bringing the ratio down, the face count will drop, and you'll slowly see the quality of the monkey get lower and lower until eventually there's just not enough faces left. This is mostly useful for if you're sculpting. You'll take it into sculpt, you might apply this, and then you can bring the face count down, and then you can carry on. That's where you'd primarily use decimation. Okay, so our next modifier is edge split. So what this will do is it will basically separate, if we select all the edges, it will separate the faces from this, so we can basically pull it apart. So if I select a face now, it's still attached, and if I undo that, select all the edges, and then add an edge split modifier, I just head back to object mode, apply that, then go back to edit mode. Now when I grab this face, it's no longer attached. I'm not too sure where you'd want to use this, but it does have some uses. You could pull apart certain meshes. You could also use this for animations. There are some uses, but there's probably better ways to do it than using this. Our next modifier is called geometry nodes. If I apply the geometry nodes modifier to this, what that will do is it will basically turn our mesh into a procedural object. So just for example's sake, I could add in a mesh primitives. We'll grab a cylinder, and now if I replace that, you can see our mesh turns into a cylinder. It's kind of similar to other procedural things. You could, I guess, sort of relate it to if you've ever used Substance Designer, same as the texture in Blender. You can do it that node based. It's similar to that, but it's for modeling. Our next modifier is called mask. What this will do, if I apply this, it allows you to set up, well, it doesn't allow you to set up vertex groups, but if you set up some vertex groups, so in this I've chosen to, just really simply, I've got a top, which these are assigned into this vertex group, and then I've got a bottom, which these four are assigned to the bottom vertex group. So if we go back to the modifier, what this allows you to do is select a vertex group, so we'll say top, and then it will only show the top, and then if we change that to bottom, it will only show the bottom. Mirror, it's very simple. If I just grab this face on the left, I'll grab that, pull that in just across the line. I'll then extrude. I'll extrude upwards, and then I will extrude that out as well. Now if I apply the mirror modifier to this, we'll flip it on the Y, that then creates a mirror. It should use the center line, so if I was to grab all of this and then move it further over, then it will move back over, same as if I was to rotate this, it will rotate over. You should be able to merge them as well. This should merge vertices as they get closer. But that's mirror. It's very useful. It means that you only have to model half or even a quarter. You could then add another modifier so that you could flip it, mirror it again across the X. So that would look like this. If I can just get that right. So now we've got 4. So you could think of modeling one wheel, then you've only got to model 1/4 of that wheel, and then it will repeat all the way through. Our next modifier is called the multi-resolution modifier. What this does is it creates basically tiered subdivisions that you can switch between. Again, this is more of a sculpting tool, but if you apply this modifier just to a simple cube, you'd probably have your own mesh for this. But if you subdivide it, we'll go 6 times. What we can do is we can say when we're sculpting we want 6. So when we come into this, it'll be 6. But in the viewport and rendering, in the viewport we only want 1. So this will increase our performance. that allows us to basically move around without really having too much of a performance impact. We can still sculpt with all the detail that we need. We can even go a bit higher, increase that, and then always drop back down for moving around. So it just allows you to have a bit more performance while you're working on sculpts. It's really useful, because again, if you want to come back to layout, you can then just raise this up, and then you've got your higher quality mesh. You can unsubdivide as well. It is really useful. Same as you can lower the render down, so if you want a faster render, you can reduce this quality down. So if I was to render at 4, that's probably not ideal, but maybe I'd get an idea of the shape of the object that I'm trying to render. So there's a lot of uses for this. The next modifier is our remesh. So what this will do is it tries to keep the topology fairly accurate to what you had in the first place, but adjust the density of the topology. So obviously right now we've got a really basic mesh, basically nothing there. If we head over to sculpting, I'm just going to take the snake hook. I'll need to subdivide this really quick. That's not anywhere near enough to sculpt with. So if we subdivide it, I just had a few. We'll just go 10, take it to sculpting. We'll use a snake hook. Let's make that look a little bit nicer than that. And we'll just drag these vertices out. So if we look at the topology of it, it's fairly standard-ish. It just looks like it's all been pulled out. But if we use the remesh modifier, then press Shift R, if we come back to sculpting and press Shift R, this brings up this grid that we can use to adjust the voxel size. So it's just Shift R, and then you can use your mouse. Whenever you got a size that you think, yeah, that seems good enough, you just left click and then press Control R. Now when you go into your topology, it's sort of tried to keep everything in the rough sort of equal shape, size polygons. So again, it's Shift R while you're in sculpting mode. So you put Shift R, and then let's say we want it a bit bigger, so we just press left click, Control R. It will mess up the look of it a tiny bit, but if we go back, you can see that it's much larger now, and the topology is a lot cleaner than how it started. So we go back to sculpt mode, so we want a lot more detail again, so we make it really tiny this time, press Control R. And now, as you can see, we've got a lot of vertices to work with. So I could then go in sculpt mode, and it's a little bit laggy, but it's working with that fine. So I mean, we could probably go in multi-resolution. I know we can, because it's not actually subdivided. But yeah, that's just one way of basically playing around with topology. So Shift R, and then we can bring the voxel size back, and then even though it was just tiny, if we press that, Control R, and now it's all big vertices again, big polygons. So the next example, the next modifier is the screw modifier. So I've set up a couple examples, just so you can kind of get a visual idea. What this does is it takes a mesh and then it kind of creates some sort of screw out of this mesh. So it kind of repeats it at a certain angle and then fills in the gaps. So these are just two really quick ones. So I'll show you how to make these. So you make some sort of outline, add your screw modifier. We want to change the axis to X, and probably increase the iterations, go 2 or 3, and then we just adjust how far the distance between it is, or the offset. That's basically it. You can just increase this to make as big as you want. It can be useful for doing stuff like springs and stuff like that. I wouldn't use this for a screw because Blender already has if we go to mesh and bolt, it already has a bolt generator, so I would stick with just using this. There's not really much point in using it. It's even got the nut to go with it, so I would not really use this for bolts. You're more looking at like these are more, you could take this as like a spring, or this could be a drill bit. Think of things like that rather than creating a bolt or a screw. Even though it's the screw modifier, it's a bit confusing, but That's the ideal for me anyway. So our next modifier is the skin modifier, and this one can be really useful for creating base meshes for sculpting. What we can do with the skin modifier is if we create a plane, select the vertexes and select them all, right click and merge at center. That basically gives us one vertex, which we can then grab, move along the Y. If we move it over to the left, and then we'll apply our skin modifier. What we can do, knowing that this vertex is selected, we can extrude this upwards and then extrude down here. And then this is really rough. What you can do afterwards is, so I'm just going to build like a really bad stick man here, and then we'll come up and just an extra one for the head. So we've got, did not think about that. But what we can do with this is, if we go back to this, we've got a mesh now. So this could be a base mesh for sculpting on, and then we'll cover subdivision as well, because this is really useful. If we add a subdivision and then increase the levels in the viewport, we now have a much smoother mesh. So we could then extrude this one out, create more that way, come up like this, make some weird sort of cactus thing. You can just keep going, just keep selecting. If we bring that out, bring it out on the X, then you can just keep going, doing whatever sort of shapes you feel like doing. And this is kind of really creative, but it can be a little bit weird to use, a little bit hard to get used to, but it's definitely fun to play around with. And like I said, you can make a base mesh really quick, take it into sculpting, and then you can just come in here and really like fix it up a bit. So that's some of the main uses. Our next modifier is the solidify modifier. What this will do is, if you've got a plane, or you've kind of modeled something and you need to add a little bit of thickness to it, what you do, so an example could be a plate. You might use a plane to create the shape of the plate, but then you've got to create that depth. So to really quickly do that, you can just add a solidify modifier and then adjust the thickness of it. That'll really quickly just give you that thickness and kind of convert it into a 3D shape rather than a 2D shape. Our next modifier is the triangulate modifier. What this will do, so I've set up a cube here with a few subdivisions. If we look at the wireframe for this, it's all cubes. Everything's not cubes, everything's a plane. There's no irregular shapes. Obviously it's just a subdivided cube. If we add in the triangulate modifier, that then turns all of these cubes into two individual triangles. So if you imagine this is one of the planes, it's then put a line straight down to create two triangles. This can be useful, mainly because it will then sort of create tris. So anywhere where you've got an n-gon, which is a shape that's got more than four vertices to it, so it's not a square anymore. It's some other sort of polygon. It could be a pentagon, octagon, whatever it is. You might triangulate it, and that might be able to sort of solve any errors like that. Ideally, you do want to make sure that you keep everything to a plane or a tri. So that's one option to do whatever you can with that. Okay, so our next modifier, I'm actually going to show two in this one. Our first one that I'm going to show you is the inverse of our modeling modifier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an empty volume, and I'm just going to move this just behind. I don't think it really matters where that is, but on this empty volume I'm going to add a mesh to volume, and I'm going to up the density to about 200, and I'm going to select Suzanne, which is the monkey. So I can now hide that, and we've got this volume that's basically replaced the mesh. So we can change the density. I'm just going to leave that at 1. So from this, we've turned a mesh into a volume. We can now look at the volume to mesh, which, as you can imagine, is the other way around. So if I select this volume now, it turns that back into a mesh. That's 2 modifiers. Yeah. Okay, so there's only 2 more modifiers to get through. For this one, it's the weld modifier. What this does is it'll weld vertices if they're within a certain limit. So I'm just gonna add 2 loops that are fairly close together, just to make it a bit easier. I wasn't too sure about the easiest way to sort of show this, so I'm thinking maybe if I scale these up, maybe that'll help. But if I add a weld modifier to this and then start upping that, you should see, so at a certain point, if I just zoom in on this, at a certain point those 2 merge together. Just there, they merge together into 1 point. So if I now go to object mode, you can see it's just 1 point instead of these 2 vertices, 2 loops. So if I go into object mode where there's 2, if I now apply that and go back into edit, there's only 1. This is useful for if you've got like overlapping vertices as well. So if this was cut from the rest, or they were overlapping, you would be able to weld them together. It just helps clean up the mesh. There's other uses, but that's what that does. And our last generate modifier is called wireframe. This one, there's probably some uses. It just generates a 3D wireframe. I suppose something you could do with this is you could be kind of creative, Shift D on your object, that would duplicate it. We could then apply this wireframe modifier to that, and now if we offset that a little bit, it kind of creates this cage around the inner one. So you could do stuff like that. There's probably other reasons. All it does is it turns the geometry, so your topology, it will turn that into like a thick wireframe basically. So that is all of the modifiers under the generate. If you found this useful, let me know. I'll put out a couple more videos. I'll go through all the other modifiers. I can go through some other stuff. I am mostly a 3ds Max and ZBrush user, but I'm trying to learn Blender, so I figured what I learn and what I already know from other programs, maybe I can help some other people. So if you found it useful, let me know. If you want anything else, then just put a comment down. I'll try to help you out. Missing someone.